Mir is a dark fantasy tabletop RPG that explores horror, psychological intrigue, and investigation. It was originally published in France by the company Little Dusha, and at the time of recording is crowdfunding on Kickstarter. The link is down below. I think the first thing I'd want to show you here is the physical presentation of the game, since it's pretty striking and quite a bit above average in terms of production value. After that, I'll walk you through the game's setting and mechanics and showcase all of the original artwork that these guys commissioned for this project. I should also note that I got to interview the chief creators of this game, Adrian and Valentine. In that written interview, we pretty much unpack all the interesting features of this game, as well as their goals for this project and some other intriguing aspects of making a hardcore psychological horror RPG. So the main book here, I should note, is called the Discovery Book, and what I'm showing you here is the French language version. Even though this is really a 160-page quick start with pre-generated characters, it is probably the most well-produced quick start I've ever seen. The screen comes as a very thick wraparound of the book itself and will contain most of the quick reference that you'll need in the game. Actually, I've moved away from GM screens myself, but taking a page out of the Arkham Horror RPG, you can always just lay a GM screen flat down on the table to reference its contents, and it wouldn't get in between you and your players. That being said, this game does call for the occasional hidden GM dice roll, but you can always just use your hand to cover a roll result if you didn't want to use a GM screen as a barrier. The Mir Discovery Book itself is this maximally produced tome with gold foil on the front and spine. By the way, if that looks like MHP to you, that's because that's Mir written with Cyrillic letters, which is what is used in Russian, Ukrainian, and several other Slavic languages. The French version of the book, at least, has a red silk bookmark and thick uncoated interior pages. I don't know if the English version of this book and the eventual full core rulebook will have this white text on black background, but I know this was not a popular layout choice when it was employed in the Genesis books and in the first edition of Star Trek Adventures. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that down below in the comments. This video was made before the creators were able to give me a finalized version of the English edition of this book, but they did provide me with a translation of the text. So my presentation of this book I'm showing you here will not be a page for page show and tell like I usually do. I'm just going to sort of explain the book's contents to you as normal, but show you various artwork from the project that matches as best I can. And the artwork is notable. So much of it is uncannily evocative of Middle Ages European work, as well as some more modern approaches, but all in lockstep in delivering that dark arcane fantasy feel. This book also comes with pre-gen folios. The idea here is that the interfacing page displays pertinent information for the player: combat and intrigue stats, core stats and skills, and supernatural abilities, while the outside displays information that everyone else needs to see, primarily the PC portrait. I love this concept of showing everyone at the table what you look like by default. This makes a ton of sense to me. And again, the artwork really fires on all cylinders. It's almost like the RPG of the greatest graphic novel never written. We'll get to the mechanics later, but this game uses a D12 dice pool, and this is what the D12s look like if you want to go for the special dice. The only difference from normal D12s is that you get the mirror icon instead of a 12. The numbers are all nice and big, so readability is quite nice on these. Finally, one of the things that the creators mentioned to me personally was how this game was inspired by a certain type of heavy metal. I'm not familiar with the terminology regarding all the subtypes of metal music, so I'm just going to call it metal. This game comes with a soundtrack with songs recorded by metal artists. The CD gave me a chuckle because I ditched all of mine about 20 years ago, but I guess like cassette tapes, they're sort of making a comeback, probably mostly among younger people who are discovering a newfound joy in being able to physically own and handle their musical media. I mean, there's been the vinyl revival for years now, but CDs are way easier to handle and collect. There's also a QR code in this slipcase if you just want to grab the digital files. I like official soundtracks for RPGs. I wouldn't say that you have to play a game's soundtrack every time you play the game itself, but it's another avenue for the creators to express what they were thinking and feeling when writing and designing the game, and how they experience it in their heads. That's an important piece of information if you're really trying to get a full understanding of an intended play experience. So let's get into the setting of this game, which is really one of its more remarkable features. Imagine a Europe completely decimated by some ancient entity or event called the Ruin. Millions of lives were snuffed out in an instant. As of now, there are only a number of nations remaining, each distinct in culture, and secret organization was formed to fight this ruin, and it called itself Mir. Agents of Mir hunt the remnants of the ruin, called echoes, that still pop up here and there in places, objects, animals, and people. The thing is, the cataclysm of the ruin happened so long ago that most people have forgotten how important Mir is. Part of this is Mir's fault because it eradicated all records of the ruin and of pre-ruin technology. In the setting now, the tech level appears to be more or less 16th century Europe. Anyway, it's been, quote, hundreds of centuries since the ruin, and now there are 7 nations allied with each other under a pact. People are not only skeptical of Mir, but of this pact as well. As far as membership into Mir, it's utterly brutal, bordering on barbaric. Children and young adults are recruited if they show any talent in one of these so-called arts, and are cut off from all friends and family. They are put through a ritual that exposes them to the dark forces that caused the ruin, a metaphysical force called the twisting. If they survive this, they are rendered immune to it. But then they go through an often deadly training regimen that increases their ability to perform supernatural feats with one art or another. You don't actually roleplay or play through any of this part of the game, at least not in this quick start, which has 6 pre-generated characters already inducted and trained up as fully fledged agents. My guess is that the core rulebook, likewise, will just start you out as an agent rather than simulate the induction ceremony and training. There are at least 7 distinct nations with unique cultures. It's funny because as I was reading the lengthy quick start, I sort of assumed that this was an all-human setting, but alas, the continent is named Delnerar, the Elvish word for cradle or rebirth. So, elves. And dwarves, actually. Let's go through the 7 pact nations real quick. The Sisteran Empire is the largest and most powerful state. They follow unicity, a religion that dictates the destiny of every individual at birth. By the way, that almost seems like a throwaway detail about the Sisteran, but the dictating the destiny of every individual is actually mechanically reinforced in the game if you play a PC from this nation. I'll cover that a bit more later. The Kingdom of Anicia is the oldest human state, a feudal kingdom whose members commune with the dead through oracles and create weapons, armor, and objects through human sacrifice. The Illuvitus Dominion is a theocracy that emphasizes collectiveness over the individual. They don't even understand the concept of beauty or art, and they're governed by a warrior religion. The Veneatori Republic is a small nation whose citizens all wear masks. They are governed by a libertine philosophy of experiencing life in as many different ways as possible, and the masks are a way for them to assume different identities, at least symbolically. The Raedarn Confederacy used to be nomadic riders who then became a prosperous city people. The Asgranor form a pact nation comprised of dwarves. So yeah, there are dwarves in this setting as well, but just to be clear, these are not your standard dwarves. They are described as hairless with wrinkled skin and a stone embedded in each of their foreheads. Furthermore, they have the ability to shed their skin and assume the appearance of other people. They also have no ability to love. The Delinatar form the pact nation comprised of elves. According to the lore, they were once worshipped by humans long ago, and they treated humans like livestock, which is to say, they used to eat humans. Nowadays, these elves are extremely rare. Each of these nations suffers a unique curse, or stigmata. These stigmata were left by the ruin, and even though no one quite knows how or why they came about, they each emphasize a sort of cultural burden. The Mir organization long ago devised ways to mitigate the stigmata of each culture, but sometimes the curse still overtakes a person, leaving them as insane pariahs. For the Sisteran, their stigmata is that they lose their memory. The more their citizens practice choice and freedom, the more memories they lose. For the Alluvitus Dominion, the Stigmata is individualism and doubt of the good of the collective. For the Veneatori, it was a descent into madness if they were to ever wear more than one mask. For the Raedarn, they were made so sensitive to the light of the sun that they were forced to live underground, where their skin has all turned sickly white and they keep themselves wrapped up. For the Asgranor, their stigmata is that they cannot change skins during the day. And for the Delinatar, their hunger for human flesh has reawakened and can only be controlled by eating a mysterious white paste on a regular basis. In the game, your agents are mostly hunting down echoes, which come in three forms. The easiest to find and defeat are the echo layers, which sort of corrupt a specific area. In order to defeat one of these, agents have to enter the area and fight off hallucinations projected by the echo and either defeat an enemy, solve a puzzle, or somehow relieve the trauma that triggered the echo. Oh yeah, it's worth mentioning here that echoes are almost always initially called into being from trauma of one kind or another. I found this to be a peculiarly psychiatric term that comes up constantly in the game. Honestly, the way that agents are meant to banish these echoes by reliving or undoing the original trauma felt a lot like Psychotherapy, the RPG, to me. But it's not always about resolving the original trauma. The second kind of echo is the echo fiend, a sort of second stage in which the echo has partially fused with whatever physical form it has chosen. Agents can destroy the physical item, which I guess contains the trauma. You might just want to forego the therapy and kill the thing, because apparently these can take the form of any kind of monster of almost any size. The third and final form of echo is the true echo, which fuses with its host so thoroughly that it actually assumes the host's identity. It can act freely, make plans, stay hidden, and spread itself. The Mir Agency suspects that many prominent political leaders are actually true echoes, and the only way to determine if a person is one is by performing a specific rite that no one in their right mind would voluntarily submit to. On to the mechanics of the game. There are essentially two main components to the rules: the combat mechanics for physical encounters and the intrigue mechanics for social encounters. In any case that you want to make a test, you will pick a way and a skill. Each has a rating that tells you how many d12s you can roll. Every 7 or higher that you roll counts as a success. A 12 counts as 2 successes. Depending on the difficulty of the challenge you're facing, you may need anywhere from 1 to 7 successes. The GM or Exarch can levy more or fewer dice before a roll to account for situational modifiers and things like physical injuries. The game's rules account for opposing tests and extended tests, but I didn't see anything describing what you could do with extra successes. I hope they include that in the core rulebook when it comes out. As far as the core attributes, they range from 1 to 6. I felt like the attributes were described a bit ambiguously. It just takes a certain amount of interpretation in order to figure out which one would apply to which situation. A big list of examples might help the GM and players with this. The skills also range from a rating of 1 to 6, and they are much more straightforward, although not quite literal in most cases. There are 5 skills under each of the 6 core attributes for a total of 30 skills in the game. I want to kind of skip ahead and show you the intrigue mechanics in this game because I think they're pretty special. GMs can throw social encounters at players whose character has to resolve the conflict based on their relationship rating with the NPC. There's a sliding scale between a PC and each other character with whom they have a meaningful interaction, and a whole protocol for resolving a request for service or favor, large or small. The relationship level with a character is affected through roleplay, and it can be used as context for future interactions. There can even be relationship meters with objects, animals, and factions. That's the general gist of it, but there is even more protocol to resolve so-called confrontations, and a lot of it ultimately rests on an intrigue skill roll. But bonus dice can be rewarded by GM discretion, who decides how well the player engaged the opponent's motivations or levied existing relationships in the interaction. Favors and secrets also have a mechanical bearing on a social encounter. Actually, secrets and blackmail are particularly strong assets that a player can use in these confrontations, but they require that the secret remains a secret. Characters can wield arts from 5 different schools. Guardians practice warrior arts, diplomats possess influence and manipulation abilities, mages wield pre-ruined technologies and sciences, Esotericists practice pre-ruin traditions and mysticism, and fools represent the trauma of the culture they're from. Each art ability comes with a cost, and they span a wide range of behaviors. For example, to use the ability Supremacy, the PC must not have been wounded by the enemy during a fight. If they violate this so-called interdict, they suffer backlash in the form of temporary dissonance. I sort of glossed over the physical injury or hit point system in this game, but dissonance is essentially your spiritual hit points in this game. And there are two tracks. Temporary dissonance will accumulate fast, but can also be removed by doing certain minor acts. Permanent dissonance will occur with certain kinds of attacks, or if you fill this circle with temporary dissonance. So remember how I said that each culture's anathemas or taboos actually have some mechanical heft? In the example that I mentioned earlier, the Sister and Empire dictates the destiny of every one of its citizens from birth. Well, if your sister in PC doesn't do the things that their pedagogues dictate for them, such as marry a certain person or attend a certain school, they can pick up either temporary or permanent dissonance. Now, this is a case-by-case sort of thing that the GM has to come up with. There isn't an exhaustive list of sister and culture laws and rules that you have to follow, but I did find this to be extremely cool, potentially. Each culture has its own set of penalties for each level of accumulated dissonance, both permanent and temporary. As these penalties stack up, your character is hobbled by all kinds of mechanical and roleplay handicaps. So alright, that's the Discovery Quick Start for Mir. I think generally speaking, it has a wildly original and very psychologically dark setting, and the social encounter mechanics are very refreshing in an RPG landscape that almost always focuses on physical combat. I also really like how much the dissonance track can tie to a PC's behavior and their interactions with their respective culture. You're not just supposed to avoid the taboos of your culture, you will take on mechanical harm and eventually lose your character if you don't. It's cool. I do have a short wish list for this game. Daily life. I had a hard time visualizing the day-to-day life in the Pact Nations. I think in order for me to understand any fantasy world, I kind of need to know how the economy works and maybe some idea of how local governance and administration works. This is already built in to generic medieval fantasy settings because you just pull from medieval Europe for all those details. But with a wildly original setting like this one, there are some foggy areas. Print and play. I don't know if they're going to offer it, but I'd love to see a printable character sheet where you can see everything that comprises your character and you can write the details as you need. I do appreciate the standing folio character sheet concept for showing everyone at the table what my character looks like, but I would also want to just have a regular sheet that I can write on. Expanded explanation of attributes. I just think one full page of examples of where and when each of the core attributes would most likely apply for which situation would go a long way for the GM. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game so far. Leave your comments down below. And of course, I've left a link to the project. Thanks for watching. See ya.